Thanks so much, Flynn, and thank you, Yachu, for that amazing opening. And as I said in the chat, this is really, really cool to see so many people from a bunch of new adopters, some new SIs. I see a couple people from Bangladesh. I see a couple people from Benin, Somaliland. This is incredibly exciting because these are all countries, and I saw Ghana in there. These are all countries. If those of you who are not watching the news, might not realize that the projects in these countries are kicking off. So we have a lot of new adopters, a lot of new SIs already here. And please do go to Slack for chatting during the event so that you can actually have real-time chats. It's tough to keep track of Zoom chats, and that way you can all get to know each other there. So as Flynn mentioned, I mean, if you're here, you probably know what open source is. If you're here, you probably believe in open source. So the point we want to talk about today is not necessarily just why is MojaLoop open source and what makes that better. What we want to talk about is actually what's critical, especially for some of the new adopters on the call today, and some of the new SIs that are going to hopefully be hired by those new adopters to do their implementation. We want to make the case for why it's important to align to the open source, and what are some critical ways in which we might want to do that, as well as what are some of the challenges. So again, hopefully everyone at this point, if they're here, you're probably aligned with the idea that you should be using open source. But what does that mean, and what are the nuances of how to best use open source? So before I get into that, I'd like to ask George Morage to come on. And George, if you can allow us to see your face. I don't know if there you are. All right. So a lot of people know George. He's been in the community for a long time. I think, George, the first time I forced you up on stage at a MojaCom was in Lusaka, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And so, yeah, back then, George was the CTO of IPSL, Paysalink, the instant payment system for Kenya. Prior to that, he was the CTO at Cellulant, so two companies that I think everybody in the community knows quite well. And George is now a fractional CTO. He's also the founder and managing partner of Altiora Technology Partners. And so, as a little bit of a plug, George is already helping us on at least one deployment, and I think there are probably a few others that could use your senior technology assistance. So, for all the adopters out there and SIs looking to get some senior help right now, I hope that they will reach out to you. So I wanted to ask George to speak because often when I talk to people about open source and MojaLoop, I end up quoting George from the first time we met. And so I thought, well, rather than do that, why don't I just ask him to give a few words about why he thinks open source is so important for payments. So George, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and glad to be here. And hi, everyone. Yeah, so I think I maybe wanted to give a couple of remarks on why open source is so important. And I know Steve is going to buttress a lot of these points and explain on them. But I think it's first that when you look at the way the industry is developing and the way governments are thinking about financial sovereignty, they all express a desire to want to operate their own infrastructure, whether they call it a national payment system or they call it a fast payment system. The thinking is still the same, that they need an inclusive, interoperable payment system or switch that is then able to drive their financial inclusion agenda. But what has often been a barrier has been when you speak, especially when you're speaking to stakeholders at board level, at government level, is that the first thought they think of is how much is this going to cost? But the truth of the matter is that what we've seen across Africa is that other systems are being built and being operated locally. And a lot of these are taking advantage of open source technologies, meaning that you do not need to reinvent the wheel. You can go out there and see what open source system is there and am I able to build on top of it? That's number one. The number two is that what is changing is that there's a lot of engineering talent, at least in my part of the world, which is sub-Saharan Africa. You find a lot of engineering talent, and this is evidenced by the fact that a lot of global players have set up development centers in all these areas. So if you think about Google, if you think about Microsoft, if you think about Amazon Web Services, they all have development centers in Kenya, I think in Nigeria, in South Africa. So the question then that begs to be answered is, if Google and Microsoft and Amazon are seeing all this talent, what does that mean for system integrators? What does that mean for adopters who want to help regulators and central banks and others and regional bodies put up their own switches? It means that the talent that you need, the latent talent is there to be able to operate this infrastructure. And that's what makes open source very attractive. Because with any switch delivery, there are a lot of in-country nuances. There are a lot of in-market nuances that have to be taken care of, that have to be set up. And no two countries are alike. And that's what makes open source attractive, because you can think about it as a foundation on which you, as an implementer, as a switch, as a national operator, can then be able to build upon. I think that's what's really exciting. And for me, I think I've seen Moja Loop grow and develop and become better and better. Having, the meeting that Steve was talking about, I think that was back in 2023. And, being responsive to the market in terms of various things that were required, big discussions on, we need cross-border payments, we need FX handling, and seeing that coming to be a reality. A lot of talk of ISO 20022 becoming the default standard for payments, and such a strong desire to see that within the Moja Loop technology stack, and now that is a reality. So there's a lot of reasons to be positive and excited about where Moja Loop is as that open source product that implementers can be able to look upon when thinking about implementing their interoperable instant payment systems. Yeah, back to you, Steve.
All right, thanks so much, George. And this gives me a lot for me to put a lot of context. So I'm going to refer back to that in all of my slides here, and I want to get us. I think we've got about 20 more minutes, so I'll try to get us back on schedule here. So what the way I like to think about this, and George mentioned something really important, which is every country is different, and this is the benefit of open source, is that and Moja being open source, is that every country wants to have their own sovereign system. And anyone who knows me knows that national sovereignty is kind of why I'm here, often more than financial inclusion. But sometimes it can feel like if I give in to what everyone else is doing in order to align to the open source, then I'm giving up my national sovereignty. And I like to think about this similar to having geopolitical alliances, which is, yes, you do have to give up a little bit of your sovereignty, but the country, or at least a little bit of your individual ability to make decisions, but the country gets to do that on a decision of, is it better for me to be a part of this alliance than it is to go it alone? And so that's every country's decision to make. And it's our responsibility as the Moja Foundation and the community to make sure that that we build Moja Loop in a way that that allows for enough variation, but also enough collaboration. And so that part in the middle about the compromise equaling bigger gains, again, that should be the decision of the country. But I do like to think about that of sometimes you do have to make compromises on some areas in thinking about how you design your IIPS to get the benefits of the global collaboration. So maybe you want to have a different standard for QR, for example, and all of your system or all of your financial institutions are moving towards a particular QR standard, but that's not going to be the standard all of your neighbors are using. So eventually, when you want to have cross-border merchant payments, is it the right decision to to make a compromise and have your market adopt the standard that your neighbors are going to, possibly worth considering. Um, and so that's where just like in standards, the debate between the benefits of collaboration and the benefits of sovereignty come into play. Um, and so the key concepts we want to talk about of why it's important um, to align to the open source is the first is the mitigating the downside risk. And so this is on maintenance and security primarily, making sure that you have the ability to take advantage of all of the upgrades that come in terms of maintenance and security, but also maximizing upside opportunity. I think that's a lot of what George talked about, which is if we're introducing cross-border, if we're introducing ISO 20 or 22, if we're introducing all these new use cases and functionalities and experiences, you have to be able to take advantage of those. Um, and the last thing that we'll talk about quickly is that the alignment is often blocked by non-technical reasons, not technical ones. Very often, if a bunch of engineers got in the room and decided and looked at this, they'd say, "Yes, let's go ahead and do this. This is the right choice." But very often, payments, as we often say, is far more political than it is technical. And so we'll talk a little bit about ways in which scheme operators can think about those and overcome some of those non-technical challenges to alignment. First of all, we're going to talk about this from both the adopter side, which is the central banks and hub operators, and also the implementer side. So for adopters, maintenance and support. And the biggest one is that if you align to the open source, if you don't align to the open source, there's the risk that your implementer, as much as you might have a great relationship with them, you will have a reliance on them that might not be long-term productive and long-term what you're looking for. Um, and even if you are okay with that, it will be harder for that implementer to upgrade to newer versions. And that's particularly true of the small bug and security upgrades. If somebody finds a bug and pushes out a change very quickly, then you're going to want to take advantage of that. And that's particularly important in the last 12 months with AI, where we're seeing Claude and a number of other AI tools being used to find vulnerabilities across the spectrum of open source tools that are impacting all both proprietary and open source enterprise software. And so the ability that our community has to use those tools to find bugs is increasing, but also it's important to make sure that you fix those bugs immediately to reduce your vulnerabilities. And then the other benefit is you have more eyes looking on your code. If you have a lot of proprietary um, or bespoke components in your implementation, then that means that very few people are actually looking at the code in your implementation. Only your implementer or your internal team is, uh, not the wider community. So the possibility of finding those bugs is much lower. In terms of the functionality, and this is where often the business people are more focused on, is that is being able to keep up with all the things that George was talking about. Instant payments is rapidly changing. Now, I mean, he mentioned that ISO 2002 is now the default standard. Um, I was at a Swift event a few months ago and heard Swift talking about maybe it's time we think about whether we should move to API-based payments instead of ISO-based payments. And that's a conversation that was actually had after all of this efforts that we've gone. And they actually said, let's take a look at that MojaLoop API. It's actually quite interesting. So after all of this, we never know. Maybe the world would decide maybe ISO is not the way to go in 3 years. And then also the other one that came up from that is that a lot of changes happening with cross border in terms of pre-validation, changes happening with government payments and with merchant payments, with the adoption of a number of different use cases, including there's a few people working right now on tap and go for instant payments. So the ability to access that new functionality is incredibly important. And that's also better access to key adjacencies and global partnerships. So I think our friends at Tazama are on the call here, as well as a number of other adjacency providers. So whether it's fraud, whether it's disputes, whether it's merchant systems, whether it's integrations into Swift, whether it's integrations into PAPS, whatever it might be, these adjacencies and global partnerships that we're working on as a global community is where the real benefit to the adopters comes from. And so what we hope is that it will be that what we advocate for is by aligning to the open source, it's much easier for you to take advantage of those new partnerships and adjacencies that we're building in the community. Um, and lastly is the chance to collaborate with other adopters. So I think we might talk about it this week, but there are a few of our adopters here on this call who are going to be invited to a very small working group around government payments, P2G payments, because it has become a very emergently important use case in 2026 for a lot of our adopters. And so the chance to actually collaborate on that design and learn from each other in real time depends, though, on being able to speak the same language in terms of what your platform looks like. Okay, and then for implementers, um, the main way is that if there's an adopter, if there's a client working in the open source, working in MojaLoop, chances are they're here because they're interested in open source and they want their system to be open source. And so we often find that there's a sensitivity from the adopters of, is this really open source? Am I going to be locked into my implementer? That's a topic that's coming up over and over again from adopters. And also, it's a conversation that's happening in the wider DPI space. So the ability of an implementer to build the trust of the central bank and the hub operator by guaranteeing that their business model is aligned to keeping up with the open source is incredibly important. It also gets you better visibility across the ecosystem. Think I see the Jenga core guys here on the call, who are doing a lot of work in the open source right now, getting visibility. And as there's Infotix and Pixelworks and a lot of others. And so that's another way that is good for implementers. The more you're contributing into the open source, the more you're working in the open source, the greater visibility you have at what's happening across the ecosystem to getting you better business opportunities. And then also lower costs for customers adopting new functionality. Again, some implementers and system integrators might say, well, if I don't do this, then I can charge more because it's going to cost me more, and this is bespoke. But the chances are that eventually the adopters are going to look around and the customer is going to look around and say, well, this is actually more expensive than what other people are offering who are much more aligned to the open source. And so building your business model around that lower cost option is incredibly important, as well as lower cost implementation. Once again, one of the things we've seen over the past 12 months is a significant decline in the cost of implementation. Um, and so the ability of implementers to actually align to the open source to make sure they can keep up with the low cost of implementation is incredibly important. Anyone looking to charge a significant amount for a bespoke MojaLoop right now in an open procurement is unlikely to win any bids. I can tell you that. All right, now I'll get very quickly into some challenges. And Sam, if you can come on, I think I'm going to call on you to help out with some of this. The One of the challenges we've seen in a lot of markets is that there are a lot of legacy systems that it's very difficult, and this is where politics get into play. It's very difficult to convince all of the financial institutions, to convince the central bank, to convince everyone, all the different functions within the central bank, to align to a new system, to a new way of doing things. And that's a good thing to have. Those debates should be had. Those debates of whether or not this compromise is good for our country is the right debate to have, but understanding what is the downside of not doing that. So aligning to legacy systems isn't necessarily wrong. It's just making sure you know what are the consequences and making sure that your ecosystem understands what those consequences are. And in particular, that comes up, the one that comes up over and over again is a desire to reduce the immediate cost to participants. And say, well, all of our participants are currently integrated this way, and so we want to minimize the impact on them. And again, that's a very valid reason. to not align perfectly to the open source, but make sure you're doing that with full understanding of what would be the long-term consequences to both the implementer or both the adopter and the participants. And lastly, is that not enough time or money. And this is the one big one comes up. Not enough time or money is budgeted during the implementation. So I know there are a lot of implementers on this call who are saying we would love to, but we're too busy. If we're too busy to even catch our breath, much less do we have time to think about this during the implementation. It's go, go, go all the time. Um, and for a lot of you, it's go, go, go on your implementations as well as simultaneously submitting for for RFPs at the moment. And so nobody has time for this. And so I understand that we understand those challenges are there, and that's what we're going to try to work on as a community over the coming few coming PI. All right, so how do we overcome some of those? I'm going to talk about four main things. I'm going to talk about three, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sam talking the last one. Um, the first one is budgeting for time and money during implementation. Um, this is something that when an adopter is thinking about this, they should be thinking about what are going to be the long-term costs for us if we don't align. And so it might cost a little bit more upfront in terms of time. It might slow you down by a month or two to get to implementation. It doesn't have to be a race, even though there's a few central banks on this call that I think are racing. It doesn't have to be a race. You can delay by a month in order to make sure that long term your system is aligned to the open source and is going to be more sustainable. Um, and and you can actually put some of those tasks around alignment, around checking in with the community periodically, or having your SI check in with the community periodically. And that's the next one. Make alignment a contractual requirement from the RFP stage. And we just saw this with, I think there's an RFP closing today. And for those who are responding to it, you'll notice that there was some specific language in there that there is a requirement to be aligning to the open source, a requirement to be contributing back to the open source, or at least checking in to see how you can align to the open source. And that's going to be incredibly important in terms of in setting the expectations for both the adopter and the implementer moving forward. And then plan for wider stakeholder engagement around the understanding the benefits. Again, this is because in the end, the country might make the decision this compromise isn't actually worth it for us. We would like to stay with our current way of doing things. And so we want to fork from the existing or migrate from the existing Moja loop extensively. And that's fine. As long as all the stakeholders are making an informed decision, then that's fine. And then, Sam, are you able to talk on how CI/CD can also help with this?
Sure. Yeah. Please remind me if you're over time. But I think we need to look at the bottom line first. Why continuous integration and continuous deployment? And it boils down to the cost of change, cost of maintenance, cost of managing change. So the more there is divergence between a particular deployment's code base and the open source code base, like the base that is used upstream, every future upgrade and maintenance cycle becomes a huge integration project. So the goal here is to minimize this and in a way shield the customization or the local changes from upstream changes as well. There are some easy ways to do this. For example, keeping customizations as thin as possible, like moving into the edges, using configuration options or plugin hooks, streaming options that MojaLoop provides to give input to further layers like overlay files, for example, and keep the changes to the core code base itself to a minimum or avoid those altogether. For example, if you want to make change or do something to the MojaLoop core service, such as Central Ledger, as much as possible, avoid that. Or the best way to manage those kinds of changes is to make those upstream if they are generic. But customizations, keeping them to the outer layers, shields us or the deployers, adopters, SIs from managing these changes. So I think it's a big factor in cost of maintenance. And we believe that it will keep these to a minimum and help constant upgrades. For example, even when dealing with security patches or bug fixes, this helps the adopters benefit from the community who are using MojaLoop OSS contributing together, and then also maintain any changes specific to the current deployment. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Well said, well said. And I think let me just, I'll close with saying, if anyone has any questions about doing this, there's a few people I want to make sure everyone knows. You can always reach out to any of us at the foundation. If you're an adopter, I think most of you know who Tulo is. Please just reach out to Tulo and he'll direct you to the right person. If you're an implementer, I think everyone knows to reach out to Plune, who is our MC today. And then always feel free to reach out to the technical teams, whether and Michael, Sam, James, Nathan, Paul, and in particular, I think Michael's got some good ideas the others can talk about of what Sam was getting to, of if rather than make changes at the core, there's ways of architecting your system to get what you want out of it without actually changing the core. And I think if I'm not mistaken, I guess the RFP guys on the call, they've come up with some really cool ways of doing that as well. So the options are there in the community. And the last thing I'll say is, again, if there are any funders or payment or PMOs, project management organizations here, very often this is where the change can happen. Skipping this step does not save you money. You're the ones who are writing the RFPs. You're the ones who are coming up with the budgets for these. It will cost more for your adopter. So budget for more during the project to do these things. Budget for time and budget for money, because you're also the ones who are looking at across Africa, across the world. Every time you do it well, the cost of the next implementation goes down, to George's points. And so really looking to all of you to be the ones who implement those four or mandate the implementation of those 4 points that I mentioned. So with that, I think, Plune, we're back on 2 minutes late. So I would really like to thank George and Sam for their help in getting us through this and kicking off the conversation with this. And also, once again, thank you to everybody for coming today and for the next couple of days. Looking forward to the rest of the discussions and the technical discussions over the next 3 days to see how everybody can think about their alignment to the open source. So thank you very much. Thanks again, George and Sam.